Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 11, 2021 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council. Today, we're going to talk about sidewalk prioritization, performance-based budgeting, and energy principles. Mr. Crawford, you have the con.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we have our Public Services Administrator starting us off with some comments. Craig Hupy. Craig?
Thank you. And thank you, Council, for the chance to review our sidewalk prioritization methodology with you folks. We have tweaked it recently. So for those of you that have seen it in the past, it will be slightly different. And for those that have not seen it at all, may we introduce you to it. So Nick Hutchinson, City Engineer, will lead us through the presentation.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen here now. All right. As Craig said, my name is Nick Hutchinson. I'm the city engineer. And I'm going to take us through a brief discussion here of sidewalk gaps and how we prioritize those projects. So first of all, why do we want to fill sidewalk gaps? So several really good reasons. First and foremost among them being safety. Having a safe place for pedestrians to walk is better than having them walk in the streets. And then it fulfills the, some of the goals of some of our plans, such as our complete streets policy, our non-motorized plan, and also the 820 framework, even creating a robust pedestrian sidewalk system. Gives people more options for transportation and allows more people to potentially get out of cars. So first of all, some data on our sidewalk system here. We have about 436 miles of existing public sidewalk in our system, but then we also have about 144 miles of sidewalk gaps. And just as a sidebar here, what we're calling gaps in this case is defined by any locations in the public right-of-way adjacent to a street that don't have sidewalks. So those could be, we could be talking about a 50-foot long gap in the network, or we could be talking about an entire neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks. That's all included in that 144 miles that I mentioned there. We have a nice dashboard that our GIS wizards put together for keeping track of this, and I'm going to share that real quickly with you. I have it up on another screen here, so hopefully you can see that now. As you can see, we have a map here on the left, and those magenta lines on that map show us all the places where our sidewalk gaps are in the city. And then on the right, we have some data and some dashboard data about what we filled recently and how much we have left to go. So going back to my presentation here. So we've done some very rough high-level estimates of what it would take to fill all the sidewalk gaps in the city. And it seems to run along the lines of about $150 to $220 million, which is, not a small amount of money, obviously. So based on that high cost of filling all the sidewalk gaps, a need to do some prioritization becomes kind of obvious. So in 2017, staff undertook the first steps to do that. And we put together a set of criteria that would to rate the sidewalk gaps that would be as automated as possible using our geographic information system where we have a lot of information. And there's two good reasons for that. One, it would save a lot of manual work by staff by doing it that way, and also made it a little bit more objective that way as well. So
Nick, if I can interrupt, we're seeing your presenter view.
Oh, okay.
I didn't think we were at first. There you go.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So we put together a list of criteria here that we wanted to score for sidewalk gaps. And they included a variety of things, including proximity to various pedestrian attractors, such as bus stops and schools, the road classification of the adjacent street, whether it was a major or a local street, with the the theory there being that sidewalk gaps along major roads are a little bit higher priority just because of safety and the higher volumes of traffic. Then we also had requests, any requests that have come in from citizens, and a variety of other factors there, such as being, whether it's mentioned in the non-motorized plan, the length of the gap, whether it's adjacent to a city-owned parcel, and then whether or not we had any pedestrian automobile crashes in the vicinity of those gaps. Then in 2019, after we had been using this system for a couple of years, we got some feedback from various people, and we decided to make a few updates to the system. First of all, we took the requests category and we renamed it to evidence of community support. And the reason we did that is we also added some scoring criteria in there for locations where we had obvious desire lines. Some people refer to those as goat paths. So there's physical evidence that people are using that area, despite the fact that there's no sidewalk there. Then we also we made an adjustment as well to account for cases where we had no sidewalk on either side of the street. So in cases like that, if there's a pedestrian trying to use that area, they would have no option if they wanted to walk on a hard surface other than to walk in the street. So that gave those locations a little bit more points. And then finally, we looked at the pedestrian auto crashes category and decided to include a level of manual review by our traffic engineers. So they would be looking, there's not a ton of these, but they would look at the crash reports and in a little bit more detail and determine whether the crash actually had something to do with the sidewalk gap or not. And then just this past fall, we did a very, I would call a mini update. We decided to make that pedestrian auto crashes category one of the top weighted criteria, so we made a minor adjustment. So speaking of weights, we've got all these different criteria, 10 criteria in total here, but they don't necessarily all have equal weight. Some are maybe more important than others. And so when we set up this system, we went through a process to weight these different criteria. And as you can see on the screen there, I'm not going to read through all of them, but up at the top, that pedestrian auto crashes category came up to the top, as well as the community support criteria. And I think that's because if there's more support for a sidewalk being built, there's greater likelihood that the project's actually going to move forward. And then proximity to schools is the next highest one up there, pretty close to the top as well. Again, trying to keep our school children safe and have a safe route for them to get to school. So the prioritization system ultimately is really a guide in decision making. So where it goes after the prioritization is towards getting things programmed in the CIP, in our capital improvement plan, so that those will actually can get built. And now I'm going to go back to this dashboard that we have again real quickly here. And if anything goes wrong and you can't see it, please somebody let me know. But going back to the dashboard, and by the way, there is a link in the material that was included in the agenda packet, so that this is a publicly available dashboard, so you can go and look at it too by going to that link. But if we go here and go down to these tabs and switch over to the sidewalk gap prioritization tabs, we can see here that there's a little bit of additional information. And using that prioritization system that we had, you can see there's sort of a bell curve of different categories. We sorted them into 6 categories here, with that red color on the left being the highest priority, and then that pale blue on the right being the lowest priority. And then over here on the left, you can see the map, and again, you can zoom in and out on this map, and you can see the different colors in here with the priorities. And you can click on these too and see what the actual score is. It's all relative, really, but so this is a very handy tool that our GIS folks created, and it is fully available to the public. So switch back here to presentation now. After getting the prioritization done, as I mentioned, we want to get these projects into the CIP so that they can get built. Some of the larger gaps, the more major projects, will show up in our CIP as standalone projects. Some of the smaller ones that maybe don't make a good project all in and of themselves, we're going to be grouping those together into an annual sidewalk gap filling program, so that we can hit some of those smaller gaps in the neighborhoods, pull them all together into one project, and to make better use of our resources that way by doing them all together. There are other ways that we can get sidewalk gaps filled as well, or other ways that we can program them, I should say. We have lots of other road and utility projects that we're working on. And so what we're going to be doing over the coming years is looking at those projects, looking for places where we do have sidewalk gaps within those projects. And if they score in those higher categories, those top 3 categories from the mid-high up to the highest category, then we're going to look to include those in those projects so that when we're out there doing construction on a water main or a road resurfacing, then we have an opportunity to fill some of the sidewalk gaps while we're out there. So before we wrap up here, I just wanted to say a couple words about the new sidewalk millage. Now, the purpose of this millage, which was passed by voters on November 3rd, is to be a dedicated funding source for sidewalk gaps. It will be bringing in an annual revenue of approximately $1.3 million, and coming up shortly. In the next couple of months, there will be some city code changes that will be proposed to modify city code such that we no longer have to do special assessments for sidewalk gap filling projects. So that millage will be the dedicated funding source, no longer paid for by assessments. And the street, bridge, and sidewalk millage, which is the millage for repair and maintenance of these existing facilities, would no longer be paying for any portion of that either. So finally, just wanted to give a quick preview of some upcoming projects that we had. We are going to try to get some of these projects going here in 2021. And a lot of the ones on that list are going to look very familiar to many of you, such as the Barton Drive project, Boardwalk, Jackson, Stimson. Those are all, and then in 2022, the Nixon Traver project was one that we talked about a lot in 2020. A lot of those projects were already underway, were put on hold, and so we're going to try to get those going first. There will be next week, actually, on the council agenda for next Tuesday, there'll be a couple of resolutions related to this on there. Because the new sidewalk millage does not start generating revenue until July 1st of this year, we're going to be looking to do some advance funding from the general fund so that we can get some of those 2021 projects rolling, get our plans out to bid, and then after July 1st, the general fund would then be reimbursed. All right, that's all I have for my presentation, and I will open it up for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've got 5 people on queue at 7:14. I'd like to be done with this by 7:25 if we can, so that we can roll through these, roll through the rest, please. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, and thank you, Nick, for that awesome presentation. I was really excited to hear this one this year because of the changes that we made in the last year with the new sidewalk millage. How will the new sidewalk millage change staff's prioritization and criteria used in filling in the sidewalk gaps? You know, before you had the special assessment districts, and those were really tough to get approved for resolutions. I'm so happy right now that we don't have to do that. Will that change the approach, the prioritization, the criteria that?
I'll jump in on that one, Nick.
Okay.
The short answer is no. The prioritization that we presented tonight is what we have been using for a number of years in identifying gaps, and also in the prioritization, we talked about doing gap with road projects, et cetera. So
Could you,
basically,
I'm sorry, the mayor's got us on a tight watch. Could you explain to us maybe some of the code changes that are coming up for council when you alluded to earlier?
sure. The code changes, right now, the code requires us to special assess sidewalk. The code changes will remove that and allow us to use the millage for sidewalks. That's it in a nutshell, with the exception of parcels that are exempt from paying a property tax. They will still have to pay for their new sidewalk abutting them.
Okay, thanks. And I guess real quick, has the Ann Arbor public school system shifted in any way to offer more money and help and putting in sidewalks that are near their properties?
We've done a couple of projects with them, and typically what we've done with them is done a separate agreement with them. For example, the Scioto Church project between 7th and Main Street, they paid for their share of that sidewalk. And we're going to be looking to do that again with the next phase of Scioto Church coming up this year as well. So yeah, they've been a pretty good partner at filling sidewalk gaps.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. Just a note, it might be easier for the public to follow along if Mr. Hutchison wasn't sharing his screen anymore. Just, yeah. But it's a great presentation. Great to see hear this update. And I like the new weight prioritization with the crashes being the top issue, or top prioritization, and weighted heavily. A few things that I would hope that maybe staff might be able to consider in that prioritization model and also in the weighting. Obviously, the evidence of community support is great. It's great to see community support, but I think there's an equity issue there. Those who can organize often tend to be a little bit more, maybe more affluent. And so there may be parts of the city that can't do that organizing, but would like to see sidewalks in their area. So I think it's a little bit, I think there should be more discussion about whether that should be weighted equally with crashes. And then I think it's great that there's proximity to affordable housing in here, but I would also encourage including median household income, because there may be areas of the city that don't have designated affordable housing, but taking a look at what the household income is in the area, you can get that. I mapped that out during my campaign. It's very easily accessible data by census tract, and being able to historically where gaps have not been filled in and folks have not been able to afford assessments might be a good factor to be looking at. And then I think it's great that there's classification of the adjacent roadway in terms of prioritizing, busier streets first. I think also it might be useful to examine what other transportation goals can be accomplished by the addition of sidewalks along a roadway as well. For example, Arbor View is one of the ones in 2022. That's a really wide road. I'm going to guess that there's a lot of complaints around speeding along that roadway already. We know the addition of sidewalks there will help to hopefully do some traffic calming. And so we're able to hit a couple of transportation goals with addition there. But there may be other areas where that weighting would end up differently. So those are just three factors I was hoping you could look at later. And then my question, I have one question. So there's 144 miles of gaps with $150 million to $220 million of project, but we're having annual revenue of 1.3 million. So that would take a really long time to get there. Has staff been able to flesh out yet what percentage of those might be covered by future development or have other funding sources, or do we need to, how are we going to be able to stretch these dollars, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict where exactly, we might get some of that filled by developments. Inevitably, it seems like every year we have at least some sidewalk gaps that are filled by development. So that's a positive. We also look into One thing I didn't mention in my presentation was we are still leveraging other funding sources to assist in that as well. The county road millage, for example, is funding some work as well, which would go beyond that 1.3 million. And we're still looking to use some of our federal aid money as well, which we can leverage with that millage money to be able to build more every year.
Okay. And if I'm wondering if there may be areas of town that are more affluent that might not rank as high in their assessment when we look at all the prioritization, and maybe there's an opportunity to maybe advance some of those projects more quickly if they're doing cost sharing. I'm just wondering if there's some ways to get some gaps filled by stretching dollars further. If, I'm not sure that I would even fully support my own idea right there. Just looking at different scenarios, I guess.
Councilmember Medina.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks, Councilmember Briggs. Your first 2 points were points that I wanted to bring up as well, so I'm glad you covered them already. The only remaining question that I have then is, I really appreciated the map that kind of laid out the prioritization levels, and wondered if there is data available to us that helps kind of designate how certain neighborhoods were ranked in that way, and which areas, maybe they were lower on the priority level than others. In particular, I was surprised, I guess, when I looked at the map and saw like 2 larger East Ann Arbor neighborhoods around Packard and Platt that have relatively few, if no, sidewalks right now, are all still pretty low or lowest on the priority level. And I'm wondering, I guess, if there is data in where they are lacking. And similar to Councilmember Briggs' initial question, is it around community support? Is it that these neighborhoods haven't gone out and organized themselves? Because with that being such a high weight, would that change this map dramatically? And so I'm wondering if there's information there as we're talking to residents about why there aren't sidewalks in their area and why it might take so long, if we could have that level of data that helps us explain it more.
Sure. There's at any piece of sidewalk that that is scored, there's full data with all the scores behind it that we could always look into in more detail if you needed us to. Every piece of sidewalk was scored individually. We didn't score neighborhood by neighborhood, for example. So some of those places where we see large areas that all rank relatively low, a lot of the times that's because those sidewalks, they're well within a residential neighborhood, they're not near major streets, they're not near transit stops, they're not near schools, things like that. There was nothing to give them a lot of points necessarily. But if there's specific ones that you're more interested in, we can dig up some more of that information and see what were some of the factors that it was not scoring high on. But what's available in that dashboard is just an aggregate score for each piece.
Thanks. And perhaps I'll submit a few of those questions offline. I will add
Sure.
that I also do think I understand kind of the thought process behind it, but I did think it was interesting that kind of a lack of amenities in your neighborhood meant that you were actually potentially penalized further in not receiving a sidewalk. And so I thought that was something that I don't know that it's necessarily concerning to me, because I understand the need to have sidewalks around, public buildings and things like that. But I think it can continue to exacerbate that inequity issue that might exist.
Councilmember Nelson, if we can run it to 7:30 to give the two of you time.
Thank you. I was encouraged by the map and the prioritization coding of a neighborhood that I had. It was explained to when we sat down and talked exactly about this prioritization and relative need and how you measured it. There's that quite wealthy neighborhood, I think in Ward 2, that has no sidewalks. And when I heard you talk about situations where there's a sidewalk on neither side of the street, and that might elevate the priority, I was, is my understanding right? And I don't know a lot about that neighborhood, that the Spaghetti Bowl they actually don't want sidewalks in that area. Is that accurate?
I think that really is going to depend on who you ask.
Oh, okay.
In the past when it's come up, I've definitely heard that people aren't interested in having them. But I mean, that's going to be a person-to-person opinion, I'm sure. The lack of special assessments might have an effect on that opinion as well.
Okay. I mean, because I share the concerns of other people that we have set up this millage and we have different choices about where we direct it, and a neighborhood that has a lot of resources and assessments wouldn't have perhaps been such a burden. At any rate, I appreciate that. My other questions I think were answered. Oh, I had one other question, which was you mentioned in your list of criteria or list of factors, the length of a sidewalk gap, longer or shorter. Did that simply reflect on whether it's a standalone project or just getting fitted in with other things, or is there a priority for longer gaps as opposed to shorter gaps? Or
I think the idea, if I remember correctly, there was that if you've got a situation where you've got a neighborhood that mostly has sidewalks in it already, and there's one or two parcels with no sidewalk on it, that's kind of an annoyance. And so wanting to get those smaller, gaps that are true gaps in an existing system filled. If you look at the weighting on there, that one was weighted, I think, at the very bottom, so it's not a major factor really at all in the overall scoring.
okay, all right, thanks. That's all.
Yeah.
Councilmember Hayner.
Can you share with us where that GIS tool is available so the public could maybe look it up also?
Sure. I'll send the link to Sarah Higgins and she can get it out to.
Is it publicly on the website?
It is available publicly, yes.
Oh yeah, I was digging around for it. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it is on the website, but anybody who has the link can get to it.
Okay. So in the 2 years that you showed with the prioritizations, a list of various streets, are any of those also tied in with capital improvements projects at the same time, or other curb and form work or so on? Or are those straight up just new sidewalks?
Yes, some of those are actually. I'm just pulling up the list here so I can look at it again. Several of the ones on that list I showed you are associated with existing capital projects. In this year, the Scioto Church Road project, for example, we're
So
doing
it's a mix.
resurfacing out there.
Okay.
There's a couple on that list for 2021 where we're going to be resurfacing streets in the residential area, and same thing for 22 as well.
So I was guessing Arborview fell on there because of that, right? Because Arborview's up for, yeah. I know the gaps aren't too huge on there, so that'll be good.
Yeah.
I actually had residents on that street say, how come it's never been a boulevard? They want the boulevard put back in the middle.
Oh.
Which, is legit. I mean, talk about traffic calming, right? That would work. So just real quick. So in that GIS tool, you said that it doesn't break the individual scores out, but just gives the aggregate for each gap that's highlighted. So
Yeah.
It's sort of curious because there's one right up the street from me. And so John A. Woods, which was actually one of your photographs, has sidewalks on the north side, but not the south side, and that's prioritized. But just down the street, or one block south of that, we have Apple, which has sidewalks on neither side, has a bus stop right next to it, and also accesses the Avalon housing in that neighborhood. And so I'm just wondering how it was that John A. Woods got on the top of that list where, say, Apple didn't. So you said that we can ask you for specific breakdowns of exactly what that scoring criteria was?
We could dig that up. We have the information available. All I would say is that there's 10 criteria, and they're some are higher, some are lower. So there's a lot that goes into that final score.
Yeah, we have Apple's in an unusual situation where there's one on either side plus a bus stop, and so every day I see the same person in the wheelchair going down the middle of the street, the same person with with crutches going down the middle of the street. And so I'm surprised that didn't get priority over Woods. So, okay, I'll check into it. Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
I'm not going to ask a question, but given that we've had so much interest in this, I'd like to possibly have an informal discussion because I think there's a lot of detail and granularity, and we need to clearly understand this. We also have public walkways in some neighborhoods that aren't on this map, and if we have public walkways, we may want to give a lower priority to those sidewalks, as well as ideas to encourage people to use the sidewalks that they have. because frequently I see people walking down the street when they have a sidewalk. So just an idea for a future discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Mr. Hutchinson, thank you very much. I guess I will say finally, obviously you've heard a lot of interest in this. One thing that I think you've heard interest is in equity, and I'm not, and we are of course constrained in our ability to do things and to weight things in accordance with equity. I wondered, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, and this may be causing attorneys problems. If there were perhaps an inverse relationship between proximate taxable value of parcels and this and how that plays, and that is neighborhoods with lower taxable values might weight higher, whether there's some sort of neighborhood bending on that. Mr. Crawford, do you want to tell me why that's illegal?
Yeah, thank you for raising the equity issue. Just to make council aware, we've got some staff. I think Dr. Stoltz is the leader on this effort. We've got a number of departments that are working on what we're calling an equity lens, and it would be a GIS layer, and we're going to go out and have a conversation on what should be included in that. It will be later this year before we have that.
Excellent. If you can bundle this in with number 11, with factor number 11, I think you'd get a lot of support at the table. Mr. Hutchinson, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Crawford, back to you, performance-based budgeting. If we can run this till I'll be to 8 o'clock.
We have the CFO, Mr. Horning, here to talk about priority-based budgeting.
Mr. Horning, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I came back to the city in the middle of the PBB process, and it's been quite a fascinating process. So right now, I'd like to take you through where we are in that process. Try to share my screen appropriately. All right, does that look good to you? Excellent. So first of all, what is priority-based budgeting? PBB is a data-driven process. It evaluates the budget in terms of currency, like we have always done, but it also lets us look at our budget through the lens of community priorities. The community priorities that we evaluate our budget on are developed from a number of places, including the sustainability framework, citizen surveys, council agenda, and the organizational strategic plan. Staff evaluates and scores the budget broken out by programs in relation to these community priorities. PBB uses a lexicon that's a little different than we're used to. So things that we might call activities, such as Burr Park Pool or streetlights, in PBB are referred to as programs. So when we go through the process of scoring, we use that data to evaluate the programs, develop insights, determine cost savings, potentials to reallocate resources, and move funding dollars to those areas that have the highest community priorities. And finally, priority-based budgeting is a best practice in municipal finance as determined by the Government Finance Officers Association. Here is what we call PBB blueprint. And the first thing to look at is on the left side of the slide, do we have new needs or do we not have new needs? And obviously with A20, DEI, community policing, and other initiatives, we definitely have new needs. So in order to fund those, we need to figure out if we can free up and reallocate resources or if we need to generate new revenue. So the PBB process kind of focuses on that top piece in the middle of trying to find resources that can be reallocated. And we have sources, efficiencies, and service levels. Our sourcing refers to whether we have to do it in-house, whether we can outsource it, or whether we can do something such as a public-private partnership. Efficiency is obviously looking to do things more efficiently and save money. And finally, service levels. Can we reduce service levels to free up funding that can be reallocated to more highly scored programs in terms of community priorities? So once we get through that process, we need to determine whether or not those savings that we found, the reallocatable resources, are sufficient to fund our new needs. And if not, then we need to look for new revenues, and those can come in the form of fees, grants, taxes, and other similar revenue sources. So I'd like to give you a little timeline of where we've been in the process, where we are now, and where we're headed. In June of 2019, Council approved a contract with ResourceX. They are the consultant on this project, and they are also the provider of the software tool that facilitates the process. After that, City Administrator and Council worked on developing the budget priorities, which you'll see in a minute, aligned directly with the city's strategic plan. And in the background, the consultant and city staff worked on loading our budget data into the ResourceX tool and getting it ready for evaluation. In April, right after I came on board, super users within the city were identified and trained. It's just a small group of folks that would kind of lead the charge in the city. Following that, in June, all city managers were trained and managers scored their own programs, kind of a self-evaluation of their activities. Following that, in July, we developed cross-functional peer review teams, and these are managers, groups of 2 or 3, or maybe I think 2 to 5 managers that reviewed the scoring of the manager's self-evaluation and assigned their own score. Following that, the third iteration was the super users reviewing all of the scores from the managers and from the cross-functional review teams and validating the scoring. From October to December, we had done all the scoring, and it was time to move into the next phase, and that phase is developing insights in the lexicon of PBB. So we held 3 insight workshops with all the managers to develop these insights. And the insights are essentially, what can we do better? What can we do more efficiently? How can we save money? And here in the green section in the middle, that we are in January of 2021, and we're now using those insights to inform our budget process and complement our existing budget practices, which include budget impact sheets. And I'll show you an example of how that's going to work later on in the presentation. And moving to the future, February 2021 and beyond, PBB will be an integrated process or integrated component of our budget process. So now I'm going to get into a little bit about how our programs are scored. There's 2 different sets of criteria that we use to evaluate. The first is the community priorities, which I mentioned earlier, and this probably looks familiar to you. These are the 6 major strategic elements that we use in our strategic plan. The other are what the PBB process calls program attributes. Program attributes are essentially a series of criterion that are common across all ResourceX clients. And I'll get into both of these in a little bit more detail here. So the community priorities, as I mentioned, these are key elements of our strategic plan. They are the main headings under which all of our goals and objectives fall. So each of our programs was scored against each one of these different priorities. And when it's all said and done, we can rank all of our city programs based on their correlation to those budget priorities. So here we've got the first 5: diversity, environment, sustainability, safety, and infrastructure. The length of those bars represents the entire city budget, and the shading of each bar component within there represents the correlation, the highest correlation to those priorities. Now, this is at a very high level within the tool. You can also drill down into specific programs, specific activities, right down to budget line items, and see how each individual component ranks. Now you notice I had 5 here, but we have 6 priorities. The 6th, governance. We thought that it was a little bit too broad of a topic to just cover in one set. So we made subsets of governance, including exceptional service, human capital, financial health, and external engagement. Here we have program attributes. Program attributes, as I mentioned, are common across all ResourceX clients. And they kind of look at things that are common across all governments. So it looks at the level of mandate. Is it mandated by state or federal law? Is it local mandate? Is there no mandate? Or is it just a best practice? Can the city provide is the city the only one that can provide the service, or are there other entities that can provide it? We look at self-sufficiency of each program. And we also look at the demand for service, whether it's increasing, decreasing, or flat. And then last but not least, we evaluate what percentage of our city population is benefited by each program. So here again is the entire city budget ranked according to those criteria. And at the end of the process, I mentioned we went through the insight development workshop process. It was a series of 3 workshops. Each one was about 2 hours long. I included all city managers, and throughout the process, we developed over 150 insights, which our consultant said was the most they've ever seen, which is positive for us. And I just threw a couple of our examples up here: like football parking at Almendinger Park, no-mow zones, injury prevention, smart cities, selling properties to generate taxes and fund initiatives, and tapping into philanthropy and community partnerships. So I'd probably be remiss if I didn't remind you of the financial situation that we are in right now. You've seen this before. This was in the presentation in early December for the council offsite. We're currently projecting at a base level about a $3 million deficit in both fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. Fortunately, we've got a very healthy fund balance of about 21% right now. But without additional funding or cost savings, that fund balance would quickly be eroded down to 14.4%, which is below our policy threshold. Looking at it another way, with A20 fully funded, as you'll recall, that takes our fund balance away completely. So I mentioned earlier, we would talk about where you're going to see PBB and where it's going to shake out in this budget process is in our budget impact sheets. And for those of you who haven't seen the budget impact sheets before, we have our baseline budget with targets. And then if there's going to be any increases or decreases that are material to the budget, we ask service units and service areas to put together a budget impact sheet. It identifies the service area, the service unit, what budget is for the current fiscal year, and projected expenditures for fiscal year 22 and 23. And then down below, we have them illustrate what changes they plan on making in terms of activity, what fund that's in, a description of the changes, and then we have them let us know whether it's a recurring or a non-recurring expense. And we tie that to the strategic plan as well. We've done that for a number of years. This year we've added in the PBB matrix designation, so we'll be able to tie those changes back to PBB and see how that shakes out. So as we went through this process, it was, as with any new process, there's mixed feelings, and kind of a slowness of getting buy-in. When we started the scoring process in particular, there was questions of whether there's value in the process. And as we moved through the scoring process and the peer review, and particularly when we got into the insight development process, I think that most of the city staff recognize that there's significant value added in the PBB process. For me, I think there's three really major benefits to PBB. And first would be that all managers get to look at all programs. In the past, when we've gone through cost-cutting measures, each manager evaluates his or her own area. This way, we get to look through the budget from a number of different perspectives that we haven't been able to do before. The second is that it's a central repository for ideas. When we've gone through these processes in the past, we come up with ideas, we implement them or don't implement them, and then we're done until the next budget process. And with PBB tool, we have a central repository to collect, store, and analyze all these ideas. And last but not least, as I mentioned in the beginning, we get to look at the budget through the lens of community priorities, which we haven't really had a chance to do in a systematic fashion in the past. And also, the PBB process is not meant to be a project where we go through the exercise and we're done and then we put the product on the shelf. It's an ongoing process. It's supposed to be iterative. Managers can go into the tool at any time and develop and recommend their own insights. They can assign different cost factors, change them as they go. And it's open the entire time. And when we get to developing fiscal 23, 24, 25 budget, it'll be available to us to find efficiencies and improvements that can be made in the budget process. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Mayor, if I can make one other comment before you take questions.
Mr. Crawford.
Sure. I just want to remind council that we do have a significant financial challenge in front of us. And the objective as we go into this time period each time is to develop a budget that falls within the policies that you've approved. And I'll just remind you briefly, there's several categories of policies. There's an asset replacement policy. So in other words, we budget sufficient funds for the infrastructure and the assets that you have to be replaced and maintained in an appropriate manner. There are policies to set aside funds for pension and VEBA as required by the policy. There's fund balance policy for making sure that we had adequate reserves to handle the good and bad times. And then lastly, we always try to balance the budget on a recurring basis. In other words, the recurring revenues and recurring offset your recurring expenditures or fund them. And one-times we try to use for one-time items. So we've got a pretty good history of doing this. I will tell you from my experience, we're looking at a fairly tough time here with our budget this year, more than I've seen in the past. So I just wanted to remind you of that.
Let's see if we can get this done in 12 minutes to get to our next agenda item. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I'd like to look back at slide number 10. I would just like to hear it talked out a little more about the significance of the darker to light, the darker shading and higher correlation and the lighter shading, less correlation. I guess I feel like we rushed through that a bit, and I do have a question about that.
Okay, give me just a moment. I'm trying to move things around my screens.
I had to pull it up on Legistar because they're not numbered. So as I was watching it, I couldn't write down a number.
All right, are you seeing that?
Yep. So the community priorities. Yeah, that's the one. I guess I was curious as you described it briefly. My understanding was that this is the darker shade. The darker shaded parts of the box would be the ones where the dollar is going more directly to pay for that priority. Did I understand that correctly?
That's one way of putting it. I think a more accurate way of saying it would be that the service provided is correlated more so with that priority.
So how did you assess that? I mean, I guess, so as a, for instance, I'm looking at safe, engaged, and vibrant.
Right.
It is the largest possible bar, or not largest possible, but it's a very, very large bar of a dark shading, direct, highest correlation. And then environmental stewards looks to have the largest representation, almost a third of, or at least a fourth of the lightest shade, which I would infer is the lowest correlation.
That is correct. So in terms of the safety and engagement and vibrant community, so most of the general fund is safety services. It's police and fire. So those obviously have a very high correlation to that priority, and that skews the results in that manner.
How do you explain the environmental stewards then? I mean, that's sort of my curiosity. What this big block of, I assume, spending, or is it programs? Like how?
Right.
What is the proportionality? Is it the money spent on programs? Is it?
Well, the environmental stewardship piece, I mean, that is kind of the corollary to safety. So with the general fund, there's a large amount of money that is spent on administration and just general government, which may not have a high correlation to environmental.
So is that, that was kind of what I was curious about. Is that specific to the sustainability department, or is that across other departments as well?
That's across all of the city.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
Hello, I want to commend staff for this priority-based budgeting. I've had some experience in it, and it's much more difficult than it looks. And I just want to say that while we're a political organization, by using this process that's data-driven, it definitely reduces the risk of ideology-driven decisions, which is something that I've talked about before, and instills more discipline. So I want to say thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for mentioning streetlights as one of your examples.
Councilmember Dish.
Yep, it's not a question. I just wanted to point out that one of the program attributes is percentage of the population that benefits from spending. And I think that that is a good thing. But there might also be times, say, when we are targeting benefits at lower income communities, where that might not be the biggest proportion of the population, yet it might be very important for us to do that, such as in the A20 plan. One of its principles that we're just about to talk about is low income and minority population should be priority targets for benefits associated with energy savings. And so I'm just noting that your program attributes don't look like they have a place for us to acknowledge that sometimes we're not trying to get the broadest bang for our buck or for a service, but we're actually trying to provide services to the most vulnerable.
That is a very good point. As I mentioned, those program attributes are common across all ResourceX clients, and we cannot change those. However, I can bring that up to their management and suggest it as a potential change.
Mayor, if I could add to that.
Please.
And council, as you, one other thing I guess I failed to mention along on when I made my comments is the PBB process is not designed to, you go through all the scoring and weighting. It's not designed to say, okay, here's your budget, right? It's actually some lenses into how you're spending your money. So on the slide that was just described, you've now got characteristics of how you're spending your money, whether it's mandated or not, and that can be compared across communities. It doesn't make a decision for you, but it is a framework that you can kind of look at how we're doing here in certain characteristics versus others. There's not a right or wrong.
Thank you. Councilmember Amlawi, then Hayner, if we can in 5 minutes. If not, we'll scooch out a little longer, but if we can. Councilmember Hayner.
And thanks.
Oh, Amlawi, sorry.
For explaining that to us, to remind us. This isn't prescripted budget. I mean, I might be going off script here a little bit, but talking more about what we're looking at going forward here in tax assessments and the perhaps of the I wouldn't call it a collapse in the commercial real estate market, but there is going to be a correction here in the commercial real estate market. With that in mind, I just have questions on when we're going to start feeling those effects and how long we might feel those effects for, and the state sharing of taxes. What are we looking at then? I know we were supposed to get some numbers maybe in October, November. Did they come in as expected, more or less? What are we looking at when it comes with state sharing revenue?
Okay, so I'll take the state share revenue piece first. We did get updated numbers, and those fortunately are based on prior quarters, and the news there was good. There's no increase, but it's relatively flat for the coming fiscal year. The future numbers will depend on sales tax receipts at the state level, as well as the state government's willingness to appropriate funds for statutory revenue sharing. So we are in a good spot in terms of state shared revenue for the coming fiscal year. After that, it's a question mark.
Thank you.
And then,
I'm sorry.
With the commercial real estate,
right.
Impending, correct?
Yeah, so that's another big question mark. Typically, it takes about 18 months for market values to work their way through the assessing system. So right now, we really haven't seen any adverse effects, but we know they're coming. Once those adverse effects are realized in the light of sales studies, it'll be about a year and a half before those completely work their way through to changes in taxable value and thus decreased tax revenue.
And can we tease that out to know what the commercial component of our base is?
We can give you statistics on what the components are right now, how it's going to be affected by the recession. That we need a crystal ball for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember, Mr. Crawford.
I'll just add to that, at the risk of being a futurist, I'll say when I think of COVID and the impact that it's had on different industries, you can imagine, for example, the payment industry went from cash to electronic payment, and that accelerated the adoption potentially of electronic acceptance of electronic payments by, say, 5 years or maybe more. I am suspecting that the real estate market here may have the same effect. So what may have occurred over the next 5 to 10 years, as far as the price pressure and the turnover in businesses, the ones who are going to make it or not, we may have seen an acceleration of that if the market comes back strong when everybody, and say 12 months from now and everything's open and the activity's back, you might have just jumped ahead. Of course, this is a spectrum, so you could then have less than that to the extent that the economy weakens. You would have just weakness without the regrowth.
And we definitely have another sidebar chat about how that equitable regrowth is.
Councilmember Hayner, were you in?
Yeah, just real brief. So I was trying to get a grip on Councilwoman Nelson asked some questions about the graphical presentation of that data. And each of the bars has 5 segments, and you said that's, and those 5 segments, each segment represents what now? Why are they broken into 5 segments? That's the different program areas?
Well, each priority has, we needed to establish a criteria to evaluate them on. So if you think about population served, there was no one served, 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75 to 100%.
So the segments represent the 5 valuation criteria.
Correct.
Okay, so somehow in this data, have we been able to ascertain, aside from the policy aspects that were mentioned, like pension policies or fund balance policies or whatever, or council directives that we want to focus on this or that? So folks have asked me about things like this where they say, hey, so we have 3,000 people, say, just to throw out a number, it's actually more than that, I think 3,000 people on a housing commission wait list. And so that 3,000 people represent, I don't know, what, 2% of our population or something. And so at least X what of our budget should be applied to helping those 2% of our population. Should that number come from policies, council directives, needs in the community, a combination of all 3? Is there any way that we can help make those kinds of decisions? Like, how would something like that be reflected in this graphical representation?
Well, to be honest, I think that it probably is not. I think that the PBB process and the PBB tool might be something that would help you evaluate those policies, but it's not something that's going to drive or help. It could help to illustrate the process, but it's not going to generate an answer for you.
Or make a suggestion like the one's way out of line, or we need more here, less there, that kind of, it's not really designed to do that necessarily.
Correct.
Okay.
You could look at our spending on affordable housing and determine which pieces of those are most aligned. Are we spending some money within the affordable housing sphere that's not benefiting that population?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just use that as an example because it had a population factor. I mean, when you say fire services, of course, they're available for every single resident, right? So, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Harney, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too. Dr. Stoltz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of council, for creating some space to have a conversation on some energy criteria and principles. I'm going to pull up some slides here, but slightly different. What we're actually hoping to do, I'm just going to give an overview of the criteria and principles at a fairly high level, and then we have some questions for you that we're hoping you can help us refine. We'll open the floor for broad questions, absolutely, but would also really, really like to get your feedback. And so what we've created here, let me just make sure before I go in. Can you see the 820 logo? Okay, fabulous. So what we've got are some initial criteria. We're calling them, this is all draft. These are criteria that came out of 820 through public comment, through the work we've been doing over the last year, as well as in discussion with our commissions. So I know a number of council members on the Energy and Environmental Commission have seen these, and they've been tweaked based on that feedback. So what I want to do tonight is share those with you, get your feedback, and talk about how we can start operationalizing them, because they're going to guide a lot of the decisions that we have before us. So just to kind of frame it from that perspective, we are working on an energy strategy, since 3 of the 7 overarching strategies in 820 really center energy, and it's an opportunity landscape for us. This is going to inform what activities do we bring forward for your consideration. If we write an RFP for a program, what do we need to make sure that we articulate in that RFP so everyone bidding knows that they have to align with these core values that our council and our community holds? They're going to help guide decisions that we make about efficiency investments. How are we working with our utility? Who do we target first, and who do we target the most in terms of those kinds of engagements? And then, of course, we want to make sure this is a core tenet of 820, and it's going to infiltrate other areas. We're starting with energy because it is where we have a lot of opportunities really, really fast coming up. but we expect that this will transition over to, as we think about transportation or our investments in terms of material reuse and recovery. So what we've got before you are criteria. The way we're framing this are, these are effectively requirements for investments. They're proposed, they're all draft, but we would anticipate coming to you with any potential investment opportunity, and we would identify how they align with the criteria. And if for some reason we brought you something that didn't align with the core criteria, we would expect that we'd have to justify why. Why did we not step up in that space? And then we have some principles. And these are values that we hold, that we want to maximize to the fullest extent possible, but there will be times that those principles will be in conflict with one another. So principles, it's not going to always be possible to check every box of the principles, whereas for core criteria, we hope that most things, if not everything that we bring forward, checks the core criteria box. So let me explain that in a little bit more specificity. So right now we're proposing 3 core criteria. These are the fairly immovable things that we want to make sure, or that we've heard from the public and we're presenting to you for consideration, have to be in our investments. So 1, whatever we propose should reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's the core of A20. And so we want to make sure that we're coming forward with strategies that do that. The second is additionality. There and I'll talk about this in slightly more detail in a second. The concept here is we want to make sure that our investment dollars actually do something, that we're bringing new renewables on the grid, or we're doing new energy efficiency work. We're not just kicking someone out of the line because we have a better bond rating than they do and we're a safer bet. And then we want our investments to be grounded in justice and equity. So those are kind of the core tenets, if you will, maybe the heart of what we're thinking about for the energy strategy. The 5 guiding principles, the things that might be in conflict sometimes, are resilience, local, speed, scalable or transferable, and cost effective. And we need your help in figuring out some details around what these would look like and what you would like to see in them. So let me quickly walk through these. The core criteria, the 3 that we talked about, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there's more detail in the Word document giving a kind of definition of this space. But if we're going to make investments with A20, we want those investments to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that could be energy efficiency, that could be big renewable buys somewhere that move gas off the system or coal off the system. That could be making investments in local infrastructure. But we want to make sure that we can tangibly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and track that. Second is that additionality. So whatever we do wouldn't have happened without us. The third here, that we want our work to be grounded in procedural and distributive equity and justice, that we want to center low-income and minority populations in this work. And that's both in the decision-making and the creation of what it is that we're doing, and also in who reaps the benefits. One of the things we talk a lot about is the contrast between who is hurt the most and the worst from the decisions that have gotten us to the crisis that we're in, and flipping that script so that who benefits the most and first from this are those frontline communities, those who've been extracted from. And so this came up loud and clear in our conversations. We were taking notes during your previous conversation and making sure that we think about and center low-income populations in this work. And that also is about, you'll see at the bottom of this, making sure that people are fairly compensated for this work as well. So it's about working with low-income people, making sure fair wages are paid for folks who are actually doing this work, and creating the job force that we're going to need long-term to solve this crisis. The 5 principles then, the first is resilience. We talk a lot about this, and I know we've engaged with you quite a lot in terms of what we mean by having a resilient system. We certainly don't want the grid to go down, but it will at some point. So how are we creating redundancy in that grid? By doing things like microgrids or battery storage. And how do we make sure that our emergency service personnel are ready to go so that when the grid does go down, we don't actually have a crisis on our hands, because the system doesn't cascade, where we don't have power when we critically need power, and then our service personnel can't get out, and so we have a bigger situation on our hands than we're prepared to deal with. So how do we build resilience into the system? The next principle is local. We heard this quite a lot in the 820 engagement, that people really do want to have some projects here that they can see, they can feel, they can touch, that are employing their neighbors or folks that they know. So to the extent possible, we want to maximize how much we can develop locally. When we can't do that super local, then expanding out. And so prioritizing sort of as we grow that circle. And we have a lot of questions for you around what does local mean to you? How do you draw that circle? And I'll raise that in just a second with some team members. The next is about speed. One of the things we know about climate change is the area under that curve matters a whole lot. So as fast as you can reduce emissions, it's much, much better for the planet and for the likelihood of mitigating catastrophic changes. And so at the center of this principle is how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions fast? And the atmosphere doesn't care where emissions reductions come from. It cares that emissions are in the atmosphere. And so this principle can often be in conflict with the one we just saw about local. And it doesn't have to be, but it could be in some investment decisions. The next is about scalability. We've heard repeatedly from council that it is important to find solutions that don't just work here, but that can be transferred to other places, both within Michigan, certainly Southeast Michigan, throughout the whole state, but also the region and the nation. So how do we make decisions that can be transferred, scaled, and our impact can grow fast throughout? And lastly, of course, especially given the conversation we just had, how do we find solutions that are cost effective? How do we make sure that those solutions are affordable and still align with the other principles that we hold? And this can sometimes be in tension with the other values. And I'll point out that there was a really great New York Times piece that talked about solar, and you can get some pretty cheap solar, and it's generated in workshops in China that are probably using forced labor. That's a conflict that we will have. So how much do we drive with cost by itself versus how much are we driving with something else? And cost is always an important variable. So these are some of the criteria that we have been working through, and I want to open the floor now for any general questions, and then I'm hoping you'll engage with us as we ask you some clarifying questions. So let me just close this out here. So,
Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah.
Thank you. When you were talking about slide 9, you talked some about, and I guess you touched on it at the end again, but you talked some about jobs for people to do the work and fair pay for the people doing the jobs. Are you speaking broadly and big picture, or are you speaking about people you think the city needs to be additional staff related to the work of your department?
Thank you for the question. I was actually thinking bigger, but yet still specific. So if we were to write an RFP, what would we want to say about maybe labor practices in that RFP that we can say, or who are the kinds of organizations we would want to partner with on futures because they share our values around equity and justice. Or if we were going to explicitly, if we were going to go out and say we want to build a 400 megawatt renewable energy system, where do we put that? And how do we make sure that's really centering equity and justice, and that whoever we work with is paying a living wage in that project?
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thanks. Just to piggyback on that idea, I'm just wondering if are we reinventing the wheel when it comes to that issue of paying a fair amount for labor? I mean, we already have policies in place with all the other work that the city contracts with. Are we talking about doing something in addition to what's already being done?
No, the responsible contracting policy will cover those elements. This was just something that actually came out from our commissions as they really wanted to see it explicitly. And so that's why we put it, that last phrase explicitly in there. But I imagine that this would mostly be covered in our RCP policy that was passed by council.
Okay, yeah, if it's anything different, please let us know. And I just was wondering the struggle that you're finding trying to stay local, but yet how realistic is that in terms of being able to invest wisely? We've already just saw earlier this evening that if we incorporated this plan without any changes to our budget, we will be in the red within 2 years. Where have you seen this in real life, where the sourcing of things locally have been a challenge?
Two really good questions, I think, in there. One is from a very pragmatic standpoint. An initial assessment we did of solar potential in the community showed about 78 megawatts of potential in Ann Arbor. We use about 440 megawatts. So we can't actually even generate everything we use locally. Now, of course, efficiency, we're just like everyone else. We have opportunities to lower that number through some deep efficiency, but I think it's unlikely that we would ever technically be able to even generate everything local. So one of the questions I'll tee it up for you is, what does local mean? Other people define local as within 100 miles, within 150 miles. And so we just kind of want to get a sense of what feels right when we talk about what local is. You know, is it really within the boundary of Ann Arbor? Is it in Washtenaw County? Is it in Michigan? So that's sort of one question that we would like some guidance on and help thinking through in that investment space. And then the other about cost, we are exploring a lot of things right now that have very different cost profiles. And these principles and criteria will help us figure out what to bring to you. You know, there are things that are really impressive that can happen here, and there are things that are really impressive that can happen somewhere else. And we're hoping that you will help us understand what is going to align most closely with the values you have, because we are chasing carbon neutrality in a lot of different ways. So that was a vague answer. I'm hoping that we're actually going to have a follow-up.
Is at this level. I appreciate you being here and explaining it. And I guess real quickly to respond to that, what local means in this case for myself, I think it would be Michigan, because we got to deal with the constraints that we have in Lansing, and you know, that's just a lot of issues that we can't do things without permission. And so I guess when I think of it locally in this manner, it means in Michigan. But thanks. I know I got some colleagues that have other questions.
Councilmember Song.
So how do the criteria and principles align with what U of M's doing with their commission on carbon neutrality? Do they align at all? Or are there discussions?
There are. I actually presented the principles to the commission as well, and they are in in some ways and not in others. We are further in operationalizing, so we're having conversations that they're having at a little higher level, so we're able to go in more depth, but we've shared them with them, and I expect if we pass these, they will be going to, I will be giving them to the commission as my role as a commissioner and saying we hope there's alignment here.
Thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
With regards to your question about what does local mean, I don't know if I have an answer to that as well. I mean, I recognize the constraints of figuring out how do we accomplish this given kind of local constraints. But I guess the piece that I'm struggling around a little bit around that is, you know, sort of in your last example of what we would need to sustain ourselves and what we could actually generate here. I think to some degree, and you mentioned that this will come at the with work on and what we actually need locally, but I guess this has to be balanced. There has to be a real push on our community to recognize that we need to be able to live a sustainable lifestyle. We can't just not live a sustainable lifestyle, but sort of pretend we are by somehow shifting the balance elsewhere. And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Additional questions? I'm sorry, Councilmember Grant.
Oh, I wasn't sure if we were moving into the local or not local part of the conversation.
Yeah, I actually have a series of questions for you, but if
Was
we
that
can
the
start
first
with that
one?
one.
I don't want to preempt. I don't want to. Yeah. No, I just I know as part of the Greenbelt Commission, we've been talking about scoring and about ways that we can use land acquisition both within and within and outside of the city to help with our carbon neutrality goals. So, you know, part of that vision and some of our other regional efforts to me are, you know, at its core, it's an understanding that there are things that we're providing as a city and there are things that we don't want to have, say, large scale farms within the city, right, by design. So to me, local certainly is within those regional county bounds for sure.
So just to kind of name what I'm hearing an interest in maximizing within kind of the county boundary where it makes sense, and local can still count within Michigan, are kind of two of the ideas that it is. Does that feel okay to folks so far?
Councilor Ron-Lai.
Well, I just feel like, you know, many people come to us, our constituents, and say, well, you should be doing this because this is what they're doing in New York. You should be doing this because this is what they're doing in California. And it's just like, well, you know, Lansing says we can't. And so I just think we need to be honest and fair and use, you know that we're not playing on a level playing field here when we have these regulations that supersede anything that we'd like to be doing. So in that sense, I think it's important to make sure people understand that.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I've always felt that council, like I was hoping to focus on, you know, policy and law that we can make that can benefit the plan by, you know, leveraging different assets in our community as we talk about local. So like it is, I mean, are there things that we can do like what Councilwoman Grant just said about the Greenbelt? And so, you know, there's projects going on up by Saginaw where the farmers are putting leasing, you know, reasonable term leases of solar fields on their unarable lands. So should we be considering that? You know, should we have a policy that we make at Council for Greenbelt that says, hey, let's put a category in our acquisition matrix that says, hey, is there room on here for a solar lease? So that might make a parcel that didn't score so highly, it might have some more credibility as part of the 820 plan. So I'm interested in focusing on that sort of thing. And I know that there's some stuff coming out of planning where we're talking about plan project modifications, and some of the developers are using that, and they've been given a choice. You can have your PPM, you can choose an affordability benefit to the city, or you can choose a 820 type benefit to the city. And I hate well, those are both things that we need, of course. From folks who want to develop here in the community. But I hate the notion that we've got these two, you know, are the affordable housing people and the climate voter people in the same struggle for the same dollar from that developer. You know, like I don't want to create situations in our community where we're kind of pitting different legitimate concerns and needs against each other for the same asset. So just a comment I wanted to make. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the example you gave, because that is a pathway that we certainly could be exploring, and sort of gets at this tension with what's local, because if that's a great idea, and if the goal is like, let's do as much within our region, within our confines that we can, then we can run at that. If the goal is let's move fast and let's get something big and check it off, well, I know we don't have land for 440 megawatts sitting idle in the county. So I would have to go somewhere else in Michigan to find that. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of, what am I going to bring you next that's going to get you really excited, right? Is it going to be changes to the Greenbelt acquisition process so solar is in? Is it going to be an RFP for a virtual power reduction agreement, which I will tell you about in a future meeting? You know, what is this exciting kind of thing that we're going to show you and bring forward? So what you just named is important. And I think maybe what I heard or want to take back is also a possible additional principle, which is co-benefits. how does this align with other goals and priorities we've established as a policy body? And that would be like affordable housing. How does this align with our affordable housing goals?
Councilmember Dish.
Yeah, I do want to put in a good word for speed. We are behind. We are already living in a terrible future that hasn't come here yet. And I think we need to do as much as we can to make it so people who have offspring and offspring who have offspring, so we're talking about our grandchildren, have even half the benefits that we do now. And so while I certainly support us investing as much as we can in Michigan in projects, Michigan is going to be cloudy no matter what and where a certain amount of the time. And there is a certain amount of benefit that we can get from other parts of the country. And I had seen a presentation, I think it was Sam Stolper who did it. And it really persuaded me that there is a role for a big upfront push to get some numbers down, to give ourselves some time to make the shift to a less resource intensive lifestyle and to develop more things that are in a local region. So I don't want us to spend all our buck, but I think that there is a real rationale behind that.
Councilmember Grant.
Sorry, I just didn't get to finish what I wanted to say before that. All of this, of course, with the trade-offs is policy dependent, and that's why we depend on your expertise. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Dr.
Well, I'm
Stoltz?
going to ask another question too, which is, what metrics would you like to see around equity and justice when we come with that core criteria? What do you want to know? Just a light softball question.
Councilmember Song.
I'd like to see what kind of responses we get in community participation and how we reach out to different community members. If we can see a good variation on age, race, if we're, I'd really like to see youth participation. The youth in town are the Sunrise kids are I shouldn't say kids, young adults are really organized, and I'd like to see if there's any way that we can partner with them. And I'd like to see if there's any movement for having them not only participate, but also give feedback in case we're missing some kind of either effort or energy or event, even in our criteria. So maybe we're missing an idea that's out there that we're just not aware of. Thanks.
Councilmember Amlawi.
Thanks. I mean, I just think it's a really difficult question, obviously, to answer on the fly here. I think first I'd want to know how much we're paying to get whatever that incremental benefit is. I mean, I think we have to understand we have very limited resources, and trying to get the most out of our investments, I think is really important, for me at least. I just think there is, unless we're going downriver and moving those people out of that polluted area, we're still using dirty fossil fuels, and I'm not sure how we go around that in a way to really bring social justice to bear. We'll just say that how much are we spending to get that? I think we have a reckoning, eventually as a society, into making people right for all the wrongs that have occurred. But I'm not so sure that us here in this little bubble are going to be able to correct that enormous injustice. So I just want to be careful as to how far we go to correct 200 years of injustice. So that's all I'll say right now. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So I heard
I'm sorry, Captain.
I just wanted to jump in and make sure I heard that right. Paying, you want to understand also the cost per incremental reduction in terms of the investments. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Dish.
I would love to see a map of energy cost per square foot by household income and property value.
What an interesting idea. We are actually working on an energy poverty map right now to understand in our own community where people are paying more than 3% of their income, which is considered energy burdened. So we're working on that, and then we'll be sharing that with you as part of the equity lens that Administrator Crawford mentioned before. Great. Excellent. Well, I have one more overarching question, and then I certainly don't, I could go on forever because I have this wonderful opportunity to get your feedback. If I may be so bold as to say, I haven't heard from Councilmember Radina, and I've sort of sat on that for a little while. I'm wondering if in particular you have anything to add because you've shared some ideas previously.
That's actually why I've been quiet, because I've had access through kind of the Energy Commission to weigh in a bit, and I wanted to give my colleagues an opportunity. I've heard some really great things. Councilmember Song mentioned some of the things that I would have brought up around equity and making sure that, you know, we're talking to the right folks within the community to make sure that everybody has a voice in the process. And I think that's really important. I think that too often we hear from the same people, and it's not necessarily always representative of our community as a whole. So being, I think, intentional about some of our outreach and also some of the areas where we start implementing some of these things first.
Councilmember Amlawi.
Yeah, just real quickly, I appreciate the numerous opportunities. I just think we need to educate and inform ourselves as to what we are consuming, how much we consume, and how much we, how much privilege we have, and with that privilege, the offset, like how much carbon emissions us here in Ann Arbor. What I think is just a focus more on reducing our consumption. I think that's like the fastest thing that we can do is just stop consuming so much, so fast. I think there hasn't been enough discussion on that. I think we consume an enormous amount of energy, and we're just thinking we can somehow buy ourselves out of the problem. And I think we need to change our behaviors.
Yeah, I do want to name that part of the criteria and principles are about, it's not just about investing in renewables, it's about efficiency. The best energy is the energy you never use. And so part of like these principles and criteria will guide decisions around also efficiency. Like how are we lowering consumption? Where do we start? To, I think, a question you raised too. One idea that came up in discussion was, do we, instead of targeting our residents, do we invest in energy efficiency in Highland Park? Because they're more energy burdened perhaps than we might be. Well, maybe, but we're trying to understand, if I brought that to you as a suggestion, and here was the cost ratio and rationale of why, and we've got this program, would that even be palatable as a discussion point? And so those are the kinds of nuances I'm trying to understand as we craft that kind of a program.
Councilmember Griswold.
I just want to caution, I think we need to be careful that we don't in any way shame or act in a punitive manner regarding low-income individuals, because they're going to be driving older cars probably for economic reasons that are not going to be as fuel efficient. They're going to be living in homes that may not have the same level of insulation and high quality windows. And so we just need to be sensitive to that. Thanks.
Dr. Stoltz, I think you had another question,
Yeah,
subject matter?
My question is about how you would like to see these, when we've come with a recommendation, how you want to see these principles and criteria analyzed. So we can do a scoring matrix. We can just qualitatively talk about the conflicts that exist or the benefits. What is going to be robust enough for you to look at that and say, I see. What do you want? How much do you want to know as we analyze these options? And I know it's a big question, but any initial reactions?
Councilmember Grant.
I think having something for consistency is almost more, I'm not saying it's more important than the what we have, but if what we have is consistent, so that particularly as things are controversial, it's nice for us to have things that we can share with constituents, share with the community. Well, why did you support that choice? Okay, well, here's something. And then if we have maybe some sort of repository of being able to see, one after the, so we can, I know it's nice when we have different things that I've been involved with in scoring where we can say this came in at the 91st percentile of whatever. But I think having something visual, I don't think it has to be, where you could maybe link to something that's more complex if you wanted it or go down that road. But having something, I just feel like your office is so talented at turning complex issues into things that are both visual and digestible. So I don't know, you're brilliant at that. Give us that.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I suspect that much of what you bring us is if there are options, it's not going to necessarily be a clear win in one area. There's going to be some trade-offs that we're going to have to be weighing and figuring out. For me, I'm going to need, I like the qualitative, but I'm going to need some clear matrices that are have some good data and numbers to help support and understand why ultimately, one column feels like it's weighing more heavily. I mean, it's going to, hopefully these recommendations are coming also with with the staff recommendation as well, and being able to see some of that data and analysis behind it or linking to it will be, I think, important for everybody because we're talking about pretty sizable financial investments for our community. And so I think it needs to be supported with strong data.
Councilmember Song.
I did my MSW and policy evaluation. So if there's any consideration that we do in maybe using Kellogg's logic model, it's just a nice visualization of seeing, resources, activities, inputs, outcomes. So if I know there are social workers or other policy evaluation folks in U of M and in town that would be able to give some guidance if you haven't already looked at something like that. But it's just like a nice kind of display of if this, then what. So you can get a quick kind of snapshot. Thanks.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. So Dr. Stoltz, you may have heard Mr. Crawford's Mr. Horning's budget presentation there. I know you're well aware of this, that fully funding some of the 820 type programs is going to require some prioritization of those programs because it's a large investment, a large capital commitment, right? And so as part of the asking of the various service area heads to dig into their budgets in preparation for this budget cycle we're in, has the prioritization of the 820 projects been also affected by that? Have you been trying to shuffle things forward backwards, or is it pretty much set based on the plan that we approved last year? How are we going to make those cuts and still keep moving your projects forward?
Yeah, and Mr. Crawford, happy to tee you up on that too. We did multiple versions of the budget in OSI before, so you'll see more going forward. But to get to the projections, we did what if we fully funded it and we stayed on timeline? What could we downscale and still have a chance of hitting the timeline? Meaning, like, could we outsource one-time kind of things? What could we delay for a little while but still eventually ramp up? And then we have a pared down version as well, which just sort of says, like, how do we make progress, but maybe we'll miss 2030.
Yeah, I mean, council bears some responsibility for that by pushing it forward 5 years, right? So I certainly recognize that, and so I know that there is a dilemma. We're doing what we can we intend to do what we can as a community to head off this global climate disaster, but we also recognize, as some other folks have said, that, and I mean, I don't say this lightly, although it sort of sounds, it's like we can do a lot here. We can be a shining example, shining city on the hill, a great example for others. Spread that out like you showed in your graphic to everybody else. Give people things that they can put into place right away and run with, right? And I think that's going to be trying to leverage the work that we're doing is going to be critical if we really want to pass that message on that here's a way to do it. And also we can say it's been working, right? So not only have we been doing this, we follow this, but we can prove it's been working. Now you guys started, please, your city started in your city, and stop selling two strokes in foreign lands and whatever else is going on all over the world, things that we can't really affect except by example, right? So I hope there's things that we can do as a body to leverage that in these troubling financial times. So thank you.
Well, I just want to name two other things that are potentially optimistic that I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a futurist either, but when a lot of not great things happened last week, but one thing that did happen last week that's good for the landscape I sit in is a Senate that is much more likely to make some investments in this landscape. This is a priority of a federal Senate. The Biden administration has set a goal of 0 emissions in the electric sector by 2035. And so we expect the landscape to change quite a lot than what we've had before. We still have to understand what that means, but we are working with the administrator and other municipalities to put together a stimulus ask, if there is one, that invests in these kinds of things too. And so we're just trying to be ready for whatever comes down the pike. So maybe that'll be good news for us in the future.
Are we in a situation where we're still trying to, everything that the city does, I hope so, that everything that the city does and touches right now that doesn't necessarily include, financing something. So like, obviously we have a bit of an ear for Spark, right? So Spark does economic development. They look for different types of companies to come in here. And can we say, hey, Spark, please, we just want clean energy companies. We want companies that do this, companies that are we reaching out fully to all our community partners in that aspect?
Yeah. I think your fully is where we'll fall flat. I mean, sure
we're making that effort is what I'm saying.
Yeah. The exact one you just named, yes. Right.
Okay.
Like Spark, we've talked to Spark about that, but I would say to the extent, if you have other ideas, please let us know. Let's not, don't assume that we've maximized all of the outreach. We still remain a team of 6 in OSI. So we are working with our partners pretty extensively, but we need to grow the movement.
And when you speak to the commission, you were referring to the university's commission. Is that correct? Okay. Right. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could add, Dr. Stoltz has reached out for the larger institutions or players in the city as far as this the question about how much have we pushed with partners. She's created a kind of a staff level carbon neutrality coordinating committee in the community and of some of the bigger players. And so that is something I think we have room, as she indicated, before we hit fully, but we have started on that path.
Well, just I guess to save time for folks to let you know where we are, we would welcome any feedback you have on these criteria. The intent is we actually go to the Energy Commission tomorrow for formal adoption of the revised principles. We'll then go to the Environmental Commission for, they've already seen the principles, but we've made some adjustments. And then in February, we'll come and ask you to consider them for adoption. And then you'll start to see the conversation around now what. So we've got lots of ideas. We've been working with lots of partners, but we'll take these principles that whatever it is we land on, and we'll be bringing you opportunities based on those principles for your consideration. So thank you for engaging in the conversation. It really is meant to get us to the kinds of policy resolutions we hope you want to see.
Yes, I'd like to pop one thing. And first off, as to answer of your question particularity, how would you like to see them? I don't know. However, you guys think them through. Whatever matrices you all put together probably makes sense, and I think we'd like to see it. I think, I'm delighted that we're going to be having criteria and principles conversation because there are all sorts of good ideas in the world that would be perfect for us. There are all sorts of ideas in the world that are right for someone else that just aren't right for us for whatever reason. And I guess to that end, one thing that and I don't know where this wanders in, you know, practicality, like how like the extent to which, maybe this is a consideration somewhere, the extent to which we have self-determination in this area. Yeah, implementability, you know, if, you know, third-party challenges. I don't know. It's a notion.
Well, then I have one procedural question based on that too. Would you like, as a body, to have a fun energy conversation where we walk you through a whole lot of technical options that are available to you, and we collectively discuss the principles and how they would apply and the pros and the cons? And so the energy strategy that we're developing as an office, do you want to come with us in that journey? I think it's fascinating, but there really are a lot of options before us.
You know, I mean, like, maybe that's something best that we'll chat about at administration, and also let other council members, of course, weigh in. It strikes me that that's probably an energy commission conversation, but you know, before a council conversation. But you know, Councilmember Hayner, you
Well, I would, because I really enjoyed our conversations that we had around trying to form the community-based utilities. And since I'm not on EC anymore, I don't have access to that. So I would appreciate being copied on that, because I still feel like we have fallen short by not bringing the electrification ordinance forward. So I'd like to be part of those that learning curve.
yeah, certainly distribution to council members for information and those sorts of discussions, I think is a baseline.
Thank you.
Thank you. Staff up and down the line, thank you very much. This has been, I think, an excellent work session. We were able to move through 3 very important topics with celerity. So thank you, everyone. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. To speak at public comment general time, please enter the number on your screen. That is 877-853-5247. 877-853-5247. Once you're connected, please enter meeting ID 990-6911. 6597. That is 990-6911-6597. Once you have been connected, if you wish to speak, please enter *9. Enter *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, our clerk will identify you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. When it is your turn to speak, you will have 3 minutes in which to speak. So please pay close attention to the time. As a matter, clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Caller with the phone number ending in 369. Do you have a comment? You'll need. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Shannon Hodemacki. Good evening, Mayor Taylor and Council. It's been quite a horrible, sad week, but I would like to draw your attention to something positive that happened on Friday afternoon, and that certainly did not go unnoticed by families of school-age children here in Ann Arbor. Governor Whitmer and Dr. Calhoun had a press conference where they both stated a goal of having in-person learning at all Michigan public schools by March 1st. Governor Whitmer and Dr. Calhoun cited evidence that many experts at the World Health Organization and UNICEF, as well as their own medical experts here in Ann Arbor, have known for months. Mitigation measures for COVID, such as universal masking for students and staff, work. Many school districts, private schools, and daycares have been open without outbreaks, and we can offer the choice to remain in virtual learning for families who still feel uncomfortable with their students going to in-person school. As you probably well know, Ann Arbor Public Schools have not offered a choice to families who want in-person school. Superintendent Dr. Swift and the Board of Trustees have consistently rebuffed any families pleased to even turn the dial and bring back small groups of children with special needs and the youngest learners who need in-person learning to master beginning literacy skills that set them on the path to achievement for the rest of their lives. Ann Arbor Public Schools are an unfortunate outlier in this regard. Every other school district in Washtenaw County, from Saline to Ypsilanti, have put forth a plan that have at least set some children back to learning no later than mid-February. Even East Lansing Public Schools recently set a mid-February return date. Yet even after Governor Whitmer's stated March 1st goal being announced, Dr. Swift emailed AAPS families with vague platitudes about always working towards in-person school, but with no dates or references to Governor Whitmer's announcement. Additionally, Ann Arbor School Board trustees have shown great disrespect to the people who have taken the time to reach out to them by consistently leaving their cameras off during public school board meetings. And in one meeting in particular, there was no response at all from the trustees after over 100 comments from families and students asking the trustees to look at the evidence cited by over 120 doctors in our community and demand a real reopening plan from Dr. Swift. The silence was deafening. It appears the school board does not care about their constituents once they are in office. I feel the actions of Ann Arbor Public Schools in refusing to even plan to reopen, and particularly the disrespect shown by this school board, are ripping Ann Arbor apart. Governor Whitmer and the advice of her many experts have declared a goal, and if we cannot support her in that goal and open up our Ann Arbor Public Schools by March 1st, we've lost our way as a supposedly educated city. Indeed, I'm hearing many Ann Arbor families are moving into districts that haven't broken the trust like Ann Arbor Public Schools have, such as Saline, Milan, Chelsea, Dexter, etc. This quote from Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 619 Project sums up the problem well. The pandemic has revealed that public schools are one of the few institutions that most Americans use and that connect us in a way that we are not connected
30
anymore
seconds.
in almost any aspect of American life. We've seen how much we rely upon them and how the fabric of our country feels like it's unraveling without the ability of our children to enter a public school building. Although I know you do not have direct control over AAPS, I look forward to hearing all of your public statements in the near future about how we need to come together and do this for our children, for our city, as well as the supports the city can offer Ann Arbor Public Schools to achieve this laudable goal set by Governor Whitmer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bannister, you can unmute your phone and speak.
Hello, this is Ann Bannister. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Craig Hoopy and Nick Hutchinson for their presentation on the sidewalk gaps. And I appreciated Councilmember Hayner's comments about the contrast between specific Ward 1 properties like John Woods Drive and Apple Street, because one of the factors that wasn't mentioned in the criteria is the impact on the trees and natural features of the sidewalk, of the proposed sidewalk. And on John Woods Drive, there is a long stretch of beautiful trees, landmark trees there at the corner of John Woods and Pontiac that are in the way of where the proposed sidewalk was previously. So I want to thank Councilmember Hayner for putting emphasis on that. That how did John Woods get up at the top of the list when other nearby streets have more, handicapped people and a bus stop and Avalon housing in the nearby neighborhoods. And then the other factor that I didn't see in the criteria was the snow removal. That there's not all sidewalks are wonderful if they have a negative impact on natural features, and if there's a lot of snow then that has to be removed, particularly if the homeowner is disabled or elderly, to suddenly sign them up for a big annual snow removal bill. That also needs to be or should be thought about when you're thinking about the priorities of which sidewalk gaps to fill. And okay, thanks everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Mayor, there's one more caller, but he doesn't have his hand up.
Caller on the line wishes to speak, please enter *9 now. Seeing no one further, public comment is closed. We have a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Council Member Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.